Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Guitar Talk. I'm your host, Mike Higgins, and it's great to be with you folks today. We like to talk about guitars on this show and all different styles of music, vintage guitars, new equipment, and if you've got a special instrument you'd like to share with us and with our viewers, reach out to me and maybe we can talk about getting you on the show. But I'm very excited about today's guest. I have been a fan of today's guest since the 70s. He has taught an entire generation about traditional American blues and jazz music. He founded Roomful of Blues with Al Copley in 1967. He's played in the Fabulous Thunderbirds, of course, the Pleasure Kings. He's played for and with folks like Bob Dylan, Jimmy Witherspoon, and Robert Gordon. He's a four-time winner of the W.C. Handy Award for Best Guitarist. 4 times, ladies and gentlemen. He's been nominated for 2 Grammy Awards. He's recorded with jazz legend Herb Ellis, and the list goes on and on. We could never cover it all in a single episode. But ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Duke Robillard. Hi, Duke. Welcome aboard.
Great to be here.
It's great that you're in with us today and with all the viewers. So I got to ask you, at such a young age, what drew you to blues and jazz?
You know, it's a really funny thing. I remember music from being a toddler. My first memory, and I believe I was in diapers, was sitting on the kitchen floor and my mother, doing something in the kitchen and having the radio on. And I remember hearing what I believe was In the Mood, Glenn Miller. They were playing, big band hits, which at that time would be fairly recent oldies.
Sure.
This was, 1949, 1950. And I remember that, and it stuck in my head. And then later on, we had a family member, my uncle, played bass in a country and western band, and he used to bring 78s over to our house. And so that introduced me to country music and Hank Williams, which also, along with the big band thing, they all have big, very blues elements to that, both musics, even though they're neither one are what you call blues in a straight sense. Mm-hmm. So when rock and roll came about, and my older brother brought home all the 45s of Little Richard, Fats Domino, Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, all that stuff, it just really caught my imagination. And the flip sides of some Chuck Berry records were slow blues. Now, I didn't know the word blues, what blues was. I just heard the first time that the flip side of Maybelline was in the Wee Wee Hours, Chuck Berry. And it just captivated me. I was 7 or 8.
Wow.
But I just went, what is this? Something just came over me. I got goosebumps. And the same thing happened when I heard Fats Domino play. It would give me goosebumps. So I kind of started hearing all these musics as having something in common, and it was a blues or a close to a blues progression, something that lent itself to the blues and sound. So that's kind of how I got drawn to it. I was from Burrville. I grew up in Burrville. There were you couldn't see a blues band at that time. In fact, I think it's possible, I think, that maybe the Newport Folk Festival was the first real blues artist that I heard. Howlin' Wolf and Robert P. Williams and
Mississippi
John Hurt. That's the name I was looking for.
That man touches my heart. That music is so beautiful.
He is.
But there lies the connection between the country music and the blues, I think, with John Hurt.
Sure.
There's a real distinct thread that you can see there where he brought the two together really nicely. Now, you've owned and played, we could pretty much say, every desirable guitar that's ever been made. Any that you wish didn't get away?
Oh, there's plenty. There's plenty. But, I've always had this weird search to see how a different instrument affects my playing and makes me think differently to hear a different sound.
Yep.
And it's pretty much a insane fetish that I have. You know, I've owned over 1,000 guitars.
Wow.
But usually a few at a time. I got up to where I had a pretty big collection at one point.
Yeah.
But
It's quite a job maintaining them.
that is a really important part of
It is.
owning instruments, is maintaining them. And like me, I have to store them in my basement, which is where my studio is. And you really have to keep them hydrated, and you have to, you know, keep the strings from rusting, and
Yep.
and you know, general, you know, reset the neck. If it's the body, sometimes bridges will come unglued or cracks will happen. So it's a really time-consuming and expensive thing to have a big collection.
And your skills to now building guitars, I imagine they developed out of necessity, doing maintenance work on your own instruments and such through the years.
Well, as far as assembling Fender-style guitars, I've been doing that since I was a little kid.
Wow.
I had I think a 1960, around a 1960 Stratocaster was my first really good electric guitar. And first thing I did was take it apart. You know, I don't know why. I just wanted to know what made it tick, you know.
Yep. Then you figured out how to get it back together, obviously, and play it, and so that led to that. That's incredible. I noticed you've got some builds in developmental stages. You're combining your artwork now with customizing the instruments. That's pretty awesome. That really makes it a Duke guitar at this
Boy,
point.
it certainly does put
Yeah.
a unique stamp on it. And,
Yeah.
you know, I kind of thought it would be something that would just be for me, but I recently have been commissioned to paint, purchase an inexpensive Les Paul that plays great,
Yep.
and then paint it to turn it into a custom guitar
More
for someone.
unique piece, yeah.
So, you know, that's kind of cool. I think I have a show, an art show coming up probably in January, and I think I'm going to show at least one of the guitars I've painted.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, on the other end of the guitar, as far as amplifiers, I know as I've followed you through the years, like a lot of blues guys, you've gravitated to the blackface Fender sound.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've probably owned multiples of every model.
Much less of amplifiers, though, because I look at amplifiers as necessary tools rather than looking at them like vintage instruments. I know most people I know that are into old equipment really cherish and collect, you know, vintage Fender or Gibson or whatever amplifiers.
Yep.
I never looked at it that way. If I could get the sound I want, my objective was to keep it working in that condition that gave me the sound I needed as long as possible.
Right.
You know?
And of course, with the old amps, again, there's that maintenance thing again with they require a little bit more TLC to keep them in that kind of condition. The old speakers wear out.
Yeah. Especially other than the amps other than Fenders.
Yeah.
Fenders were really more durable than any other amp. But Gibsons, which I just love Gibson amps, I love the sound of them, but they seem to be more delicate. And, you know, I would never take one on tour.
Right.
You know, of course, if I took one on tour, it would be couldn't be any newer than a 1960. So, of course, they're going to be delicates because they're so many years old, you know.
Absolutely. Now, I noticed in your resume that you once worked for Guild Guitars.
I did.
And you've got a piece over there that just looks gorgeous. Tell us a little bit about that piece.
Well, actually, that's my newest acquisition, and it's a 1956 Guild. I believe I think it's called a CC100.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually made, I thought it was a Hoboken guitar, but Guild started off in New York City for a short time, maybe just a year or so, and then they moved to Hoboken, and then eventually to Westerly, Rhode Island,
yeah.
which is where I worked. But this is actually a New York Guild, so it's a first-year Guild.
That's quite a find in that condition.
Yeah, it's
Looks
in
wonderful.
fabulous condition, and it It's really just a perfect
Now,
instrument for me.
with your touring schedule, I mean, you keep the schedule of a 30-year-old. It's just, it's crazy. Like, I see you in countries all over the world, constantly gigging.
But I don't work as much as you.
Oh, I don't know. But now I would imagine there'd be some hesitation to travel abroad with instruments of that vintage.
Not for me.
No?
As long as the case is really a good protective case. I've always felt that an instrument is to play.
It is.
And I think it's kind of a crime to just have them in a case or, some kind of display thing and not use them.
Amen to that.
I just really believe that,
And most working musicians that I know, a long way from being rich people. So their
Yeah.
instruments and amps are their tools. That's their trade, and they're in service constantly. I can't afford to own fancy instruments that I can't play.
Right.
If I don't play it, it goes bye-bye.
Yeah.
That's the rule with me. So you do travel. So do you check them, or do you put them in the overhead? What's your policy on a guitar?
I try to get them on the overhead.
Yeah.
And I fight with a lot of,
I bet.
usually women in the airlines are the ones that won't let you on. I don't understand why.
Will they let you put the
something
plane up
funny
by
in
the
there.
cabin? Sometimes they put it up front for you.
Sometimes they'll put it in a
guitar,
closet,
I mean,
or there's also what's called gate check. So when you get to the plane, they take it and they put it the last thing, hand carry it and put it in, which
so
is
it's safe.
safer.
Yeah, that's
and then
good.
they take it out and they bring it to you on the jetway before you really get 10 feet from the plane. So that's safe too. I trust that. And I actually had an L5
Wow.
that was not destroyed, but the top cracked from
Ouch.
from a flight and them
Rough
just
handling.
throwing it. Yeah. And I was on my way to Australia, and I had to have it fixed while I was there, and I there bought a really big, heavy flight case, which I've never used since because
Right.
it's just so
Right.
giant,
Now back to the playing. The thing I've always noticed about you, and I saw this the first time I think I ever saw you in Roomful, but more so it stood out when I saw the first incarnation of the Pleasure Kings with Onright and DeQuattro. Rest in peace. That was a great trio.
Oh, yeah.
But you always had that ability, even in a trio, I could always hear the changes. I could always hear the melody. And that's a real skill that you have to practice and develop. And even when you're nailing it into like a Freddie King vibe with there's so much kind of heat going into that solo, you never lose that melody. And that's a real gift. And I think it shines every time I see you in concert. I always hear that.
Well, I've been influenced as much or maybe even more by horn players than guitar players. When I started Roomful and I got really interested in swing and early R&B, people like Lester Young and Gene Ammons and then trumpeters like, Louis Armstrong,
Right.
or Cootie Williams, or Roy Eldridge. They were all guys who I just was really moved by how they made a solo. And even in blues, how Lester Young can take a blues and play it so melodically that you don't even know you're listening to a blues. It's so beautiful and completely different than what anyone else would think of.
Right.
That it becomes a whole different form. But he was a master at playing blues, and he, among many of the jazz musicians, would say, your solo has to tell a story. It needs a beginning, it needs to build up and come to a conclusion, and then get out in a way that makes sense.
Yes.
So that way of thinking it had everything to do with my playing from
It
from when
shows
I was
really
very
through.
young.
It comes through, and with the band you have now with Bruce and Brad and Mark,
Yeah.
I mean, you've got your ultimate band there. I mean,
Oh, I really
these
do.
guys really, really are all locked in. I mean,
They certainly are.
it's so
and
tight.
A lot of it has to do with also playing together for a long time. You
Yep.
know, it's been about 10 years or even more for some of them. So, you know, when you play together that much and a lot, you develop a band sound and a style. And that's really the ultimate thing, because you don't even have to look at each other. You just know where the other guy's going, and not because of repetition, but just, I don't know, it's just an organic thing that happens the more you play together.
You understand their musical personalities, and you really lock in with them.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you play something for us, Duke? Let's hear that Guild.
Sure.
Folks, Duke's going to play for us. We'll be right back with you. Stick around. You're not going to want to miss this. Well, that was something, wasn't it, folks? That's how you play guitar. You heard a lot of information in that piece. There's a lot of different types of chords and turnarounds and such, but it never lost the feel. It's just a wonderful, wonderful sound. And to get to that point takes a long time. And which is what I want to share with you. You can get lessons from Duke online, right?
That is true, yes.
And I've looked at some of that stuff, boy, and you don't hold back anything. You really teach everybody pretty much the gamut of all the things you've learned and played over the years. And
It's a beautiful thing, the Sonic Junction
Yes, Sonic Junction.
thing, website, because, well, they have several other musicians, too, teaching. And, you know, I have people all over the entire world that take lessons
That's awesome.
from this. And I do feel like when I'm talking to them on camera, I feel like I'm really personally talking to each person, because I've got to know some of them. I've met some of them in different cities that I've played, and and the questions that they ask me. You know, it's a real personal thing, even though I'm, you know, teaching God knows how many people. I don't actually
That's
know.
fantastic. You've got a new release.
I do.
And you're in some pretty good company there. You've got some of the most wonderful female artists and vocalists out there. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the album is, first of all, it's on MC Records, and the album is called, or I should say CD, I call them albums, but it's called Duke Robillard and His Dames of Rhythm.
That's awesome.
And it's my regular band, Bruce Bears, Mark Texera, Brad Helene, and myself, with a horn section added to it of just fabulous players. John Kelso from New York, one of the greatest trumpeters ever, and Rich Latai from Roomful, Carl Corfith on trombone, who's former Roomful also, Billy Novick on alto and clarinet, who's one of my favorite musicians. Also, Mark Early makes an appearance on it, on one song. And the whole album concept was for me to do tunes from the 1920s and 30s that that feature these female vocalists. I'm a fan of jazz female vocalists. So we have Maria Muldaur, we have Madeline Peru, Sonny Crownover, who sings with my band very often, Kelly Hunt, Catherine Russell, and Elizabeth McGovern, the actress, who I befriended because she's got a band and she played the Met in Providence in Pawtucket once, and I went down and I actually ended up opening for her, and we became good friends.
Oh, that's great.
And so she, via the wonder of sending tracks across the internet, we got her to do a tune on the album. So it's a really eclectic bunch of songs from the 20s and 30s, some well-known tunes and some that aren't very well-known. And it was just a joy to make. The music
I bet it was
all recorded live, and most of the vocals were done after because everybody couldn't be there at the same time. You know? But
right. Now, and prior to that, you released a wonderful acoustic CD.
Oh, yes.
That's a great CD.
Oh, thank you.
And
I'm real proud of it.
To hear you in that context is a treat, because you don't do that live.
No, I don't. And I spent like 10 years about where I was really kind of soaking up and learning about, you know, early American music, like country music and mountain music, you know, the Virginia thing, you know, the Carter family and Jimmy Rogers and all of that. And I really soaked it up because I felt I needed to get more background in it. And there was some stuff that was natural to me, but some I had to kind of learn that style. And I played instruments I never play, you know, like mandolin and you know, dobro style guitar. And
yeah, it's a really great CD. And folks, if you go to Duke's site, we're going to post that for you. You'll be able to get all that music. And I can't encourage you enough. And also, you can see Duke here in Taunton a couple times in the coming year at the Thursday Night Blues series that we have at the Baja Brothers Sandbar Grill. And I know you're going to be in January. I think that's the next one we've got you on the books for.
Yeah, that's right.
So, World Class Blues right here in town. So make sure you come out to see that. And maybe he'll sign a CD for you if you get one and bring it along to the gig.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So let's pick a little something for the viewers. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, and especially to Duke for taking time out of his schedule of touring the world and creating these wonderful works of art for all of us to enjoy, to take a little time and visit with us today. Thank you, my friend.
My pleasure, Mike.
All right, we're going to pick a little something.